While the life of a queen might sound like a dream, have you ever wondered what it was really like to be the servant of royalty? If you've ever been curious about the harsh reality of these hidden laborers, then keep watching to find out what it was actually like to be the servant of a queen. Welcome to my channel, and today, we will take a closer look at the terrifying reality of working as a servant in the royal court. Make sure to watch until the end to learn all the secrets they tried to hide from us. When one thinks of a royal court, sparkling, exquisite ball gowns and elegantly decorated halls immediately come to mind. However, the reality was far from the glamorous picture often depicted in movies. Royal courts were incredibly filthy places. In fact, servants rarely bathed and did everything in their power to avoid water, since it was believed that water would open the pores and expose the body to deadly diseases. Since perfume was considered a sign of wealth and status, everyone, especially servants, used it to cover up the truly awful stench. Chamber pots had to be emptied frequently, since they were used for both urination and defecation, and this task fell on the shoulders of the servants. Just imagine having to clean this several times a day. No wonder people preferred not to bathe, since you'd get pretty dirty in the process. In addition to having to clean the toilets, servants also had to deal with soiled clothing and bedding. Often the whole laundry would be infested with lice and other vermin, which they had to remove by hand. Another particularly unpleasant task was dealing with the queen's chamber pot. During her period, the queen's chamber pot was often placed next to her bed, and servants had to empty it without being noticed. That means they had to get up in the middle of the night and perform this horrible task and do everything to make sure the queen didn't wake up. And when it comes to the smell, well, just imagine the combination of sweat, decay, and human waste. It's no wonder servants had to use so much perfume. Sometimes the stench was simply unbearable. But the dirty work didn't stop there. Servants often had to clean the floors with a mop, which was probably one of the dirtiest things they did. It's hard to believe, but back then, servants didn't wear gloves while doing this. And if the queen wasn't happy with their performance, they sometimes got punished severely for it. So not only did they have to clean up the mess, but they also had to do it perfectly. Otherwise, they ran the risk of getting beaten or losing their job. And it gets even worse. While servants worked hard to please the queen, she rarely appreciated their efforts. Queens were known to be demanding and spoiled, and they expected their servants to read their minds and anticipate their every need. It was a thankless job, but someone had to do it. After all, the queen's happiness depended on them. And believe me, when I say that the tiniest mistake could cost them dearly. Queens could be extremely unforgiving, and a servant could be fired or even put in prison for making a mistake. It wasn't just the queen that servants had to worry about. In fact, the whole court was full of dangers. For example, during the Tudor era, King Henry VIII had two of his wives beheaded, and you never knew whose turn it might be next. Servants could find themselves in great danger if they got caught in the crossfire of the queen's anger. If you think the hours were good at least, well, unfortunately, that's not the case either. Servants didn't have set hours. They had to be available to the queen at all times, day or night. There was no such thing as a break or time off. When the queen needed something, servants had to drop whatever they were doing and rush to her side. It didn't matter if it was the middle of the night, or if they were in the middle of their only meal of the day, they had to drop everything and serve the queen. Let's not forget that the royal palaces were often right next to the kitchens, stables, and other areas that produced bad smells. That means servants not only had to deal with the smell of decay and waste in the palace itself, but also from other sources. Their living quarters were usually located right next to the dirtiest parts of the palace, so they were constantly surrounded by smoke, manure, and garbage. To top it all off, their rooms were tiny, and often shared with other servants, leaving little privacy and personal space. But the worst part of all this was that servants had to endure it all with a smile on their faces. They weren't allowed to complain or show any emotion except obedience. After all, they were there to serve the queen and make her happy. If they showed any negativity, they would be punished severely. Now let's talk about the clothes. Queens loved to wear beautiful flowing gowns that made them look like real-life princesses. But have you ever wondered who had to put them on? Of course, the servants did. And it wasn't an easy task. Many of these gowns weighed over 30 pounds and were made of thick fabric that required 2 or 3 servants to help put them on. But that wasn't all. These dresses were rarely washed, so servants had to deal with the dirt and sweat stains, not to mention the lice and other vermin that often infested them. Imagine trying to put on a dress covered in bugs and dirt. It sounds disgusting, but that was the reality for many servants. And to make matters worse, they had to do it quickly and efficiently. After all, the queen was always in a hurry and didn't have time to wait around. A simple mistake could lead to a ripped dress and a very angry queen. Another crucial part of dressing the queen was the corset. This undergarment was essential for giving the queen's dress its shape and making her look slim and elegant. But it wasn't exactly comfortable. In fact, corsets were extremely tight and painful to wear. Servants had to lace them up tightly to get the desired effect, and they had to do it perfectly. If the corset was too loose, the queen wouldn't look her best. And if it was too tight, she could be in pain and possibly injured. Despite all the hard work and danger, servants were rarely appreciated for their efforts. In fact, they were often forgotten, and their names were lost to history. But why was that? Why did they work so hard with so little appreciation? Well, the answer is simple. Servants were expendable. There was always another servant who could replace them. Well, they were easily replaceable cogs in the machine of the royal court. But perhaps the worst part of being a servant was the isolation. They were cut off from the outside world and didn't know what was going on beyond the palace walls. They couldn't read newspapers or listen to the radio. They were truly in a bubble. And this isolation made it difficult for them to form relationships with people outside the palace. They were truly trapped in their own little world. I mentioned before that servants had to be careful not to make mistakes, but it was not just because of the risk of losing their job. Mistakes could have serious consequences. A wrong word or a bad decision could get them sent to prison or even executed. For example, one wrong move against the queen, and you might end up beheaded. That's how dangerous it was to work in the royal court. Surgeons were generally reluctant to treat servants since they were viewed as lower-class citizens. In fact, some surgeons refused to treat servants at all. This meant that when servants got sick, they had to rely on folk remedies and traditional medicine. Sadly, this often led to their ailments becoming much worse, and in some cases resulted in death. Perhaps the most heartbreaking fact about servants is that they were not only invisible to the public, but often forgotten in history books. We know very little about their lives, and even less about their names. It's as if they were erased from history. They were the backbone of the royal court, but their contributions were never recognized. As we've seen, being a servant of the queen was not an easy job. It was hard, dangerous, and thankless work. But someone had to do it. And it is thanks to these servants that the queens were able to live their lavish lifestyles and maintain their status. In conclusion, the life of a servant in a royal court was a grim reality, far from the glamour and elegance depicted in popular culture. They faced a multitude of hardships, from terrible hygiene and sanitary conditions to exhausting labor and the constant threat of punishment. The lack of basic rights, medical care, and the psychological toll of servitude further compounded their suffering. Despite the brutality, they played a vital role in maintaining the facade of the opulent lifestyle of the elite. Their stories, though often overlooked, are essential to understanding the true cost of luxury and the human cost of historical opulence. By shedding light on their experiences, we can gain a deeper appreciation for their contributions and the challenges they faced in an era where their voices were silenced.